Thanks so much for joining us, Agata.
Of course.
We're talking about open science, fact versus fiction. But first, who are you?
Who am I? Thanks for inviting me for this panel, of course. My name is Agata Bochynska. I work at this section for open research here at the University of Oslo, at the University Library. But I'm not a librarian. It's a common confusion. I'm a researcher with background in psychology and linguistics, actually. So my main research focus has been on cognitive development and language. But there are actually a lot of researchers at the library, or a lot of people with research background that are working on issues around open research, reproducibility of research, research improvement, research transparency, and so on.
And how did you find your way to open science? Quite a lot of people have like an origin story where this thing happened to be during my master's or my bachelor, or sometimes it's not the case. But for you, how did you find your way into getting involved with open science?
Definitely not during my master's, and not even during my PhD, actually. Now when I think about my sort of transparency of my master's or doctoral research, I'm like, I could have done it so much better. And, but at the time when I was doing my master's or my PhD, nobody taught me about data management and data sharing, increasing transparency of research. There was nothing like that.
How many years ago was that?
Hey, that's
it's more like it's so interesting seeing how things have changed over time.
Right. So I defended my PhD in 2018, the end of 2018, right? So that was not that long time ago, but I think there are also huge geographical differences. I defended my PhD in Norway, and I feel like at that time there was very little discussion around that, or maybe the discussion happened in certain circles, but it was not really reaching PhD students at that time. So for me, that was not yet when I was aware of that. Towards the end of my PhD, I was getting more and more aware and sort of noticing that, hey, like, I don't think this is right to sort of hoard the data this way, to be so protective about the methods and the data. I was like, no, I think we should be more transparent. And actually, when I was applying for my postdoc positions, the lab that I chose it also because it was a very open sciencey lab.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I would like somebody to teach me all of this stuff, because I think this is important, so I would like to go in this direction. And I was really lucky that the lab, shout out to Moira Dillon and her lab at New York University, taught me all about data sharing pre-registrations and just increasing research transparency in general.
Okay, it's great that you had that environment around you. So we're going to be talking about open science, fact versus fiction. And the first thing I want to talk about is this idea that I often see online that open science is just a fad. We'll just, people are just interested in this because it's the new thing. What do you think when you hear something like that, where that open science is a fad?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's really tightly linked to research ethics in general, and ethical research conduct and research integrity. And we've been hearing about transparency and credibility and trustworthiness of research and repeatability of research without the terms open science and reproducibility. Now, definitely, it gained traction because it started spreading so quickly, and people associate that with the term open science and with the term reproducibility. But sort of the content of these terms, it has been around for a while, and the sort of issues that we are discussing now were also discussed before, but maybe under different branding.
But
right?
why now? Why do you think this has all kind of happened now?
I actually think there's a very straightforward answer to that, and that's the digitalization of research.
Okay.
And everything suddenly ended up in the cloud, and it's so easy and seamless to share things with just one click. And I think that just pushed the development of sharing and transparency. I really love the example also talking about not only sharing of data and methods, but example that I think you, Dan, gave in your classes where for pre-registering research back in the days, there was this researcher that said how would I pre-register? I would send myself a letter, and then there would be that stamp that says the date when I decided on my methods and on my statistical analysis. And that would be that sort of verification. But now it's so easy because we have all that digital infrastructure where you can just register something online with a date and time, and that proves or shows when you decided certain things. So it's that, increasing that transparency of planning research. So I think all that development of, everything being online, being in the cloud, seamless sharing, seamless registrations, that just made it possible.
Yeah, so it's been around for quite a while. It's just that the methods seem to have improved to make things a lot easier. So, yeah, but it's strange because I sort of share the same thing as you, that I hear that it's a fad, and I'm like, well, no, it's just been around for a very, very long time, but often different terms are used to explain this stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Often when we talk about open science, one of the first questions we tend to get, at least within psychology, is, I can't share my data. I can't participate in this. When you do a lot of work, within open science and open science education, what is your sort of first response when someone says, well, I simply can't share my data?
Well, my first response is that, of course, it's completely understandable. And open science is not about only data sharing, first of all. Within data sharing, open science is not about only raw data sharing. And I think that sort of understanding that one size does not fit all, and open science is not prescriptive in only one particular way, but that we need to adjust it to different methodologies, and we need to understand that whole epistemic diversity that we have within research and within sciences. This is also why we at the University of Oslo, we use term open research actually, and now open science, because science does not feel relatable to all areas of research, like, for example, qualitative research. And more sort of inclusive term is also showing that different solutions for increasing transparency of research will fit different methodologies. So whenever a researcher tells me that they cannot share data, that's completely understandable. But my second question is, what kind of data do you collect? Can we find a solution for choosing a particular spot on this whole spectrum of data sharing where you could actually make your data maybe not open, but maybe more reusable? Not for everybody, because this data cannot be seen by everybody. It has certain protections, certain legal regulations, ethical regulations on these protections, but maybe there is some version of that data that can be shared with others and reused, or maybe even raw data could be shared with very specific researchers that could reuse it and could have more benefit from that material.
You said something interesting, reusability. What do you mean specifically by data reusability?
Yeah, so I think that's also an interesting nuance that we talk about data sharing and data reusability. And of course, data needs to be shared to be reused, but I think putting more weight on reusability itself shows that we are not talking about open sharing, just uploading the whole data set in cloud, but we can also find other ways for making data available for others to reuse. And for example, a data set that I collect could be sitting internally, prepared for being reused later. It could be sitting internally on the servers of wherever I'm working, but I might be openly sharing metadata of that data set so that it's findable for others. And then if there's a person that has a project that could fit this data and has necessary permissions, then I can make this data available for reuse. So what we mean by reuse is really any use of this data set that I collected by anybody else, but also by future me. So, of course, only reusing data yourself is a sort of restricting that to self-interest, maybe, but we also talk about that self sort of reuse later in the future. And for that, data also need to be properly managed and prepared for reuse later so that it's not one big mess of data.
Yeah, I really like this concept of metadata and this idea as well that your future self is your most important collaborator. Someone emailed me asking for my data from my PhD, and I'm like,
no chance.
No chance.
No chance.
It's in a filing cabinet in the basement somewhere in the University of Sydney, if it even exists.
Yep.
And part of me was like, I wish I could say yes, but I simply couldn't. And that really helps me with thinking about how I'm storing my own data, even though a lot of the data that I'm sharing is quite sensitive. At least so that I can access this again in 10 years' time.
Absolutely. And also, I think that even thinking only about self-interest here can be also very helpful in the sense that if you prepare data for future reuse for yourself, it will be also ready for future reuse for anybody else, right? So I also had this story where somebody asked me for data for my PhD, and I started digging through it, and it was still possible because it was completely anonymous data, actually. So it was still possible to share it. But then I did share it with this person, but we had to work together very closely so that that person could understand what was in that data set. Because, for example, I didn't have a proper code book. So all my variables were not really described very well. And then I had to dig up my messy notes from my
It's amazing you still had the notes. That's great.
I actually still have the notes, which is any preservation is good preservation, right? But sort of organized and documented preservation is the best possible scenario, because then it takes really, really long time later in the future to sort it out.
How do you go about teaching yourself new tasks and new techniques? Because this idea of data dictionary is something I'm trying to implement in my own work a little bit more, and I'm constantly finding there are new things to learn. Because there's always new things, how do you learn new stuff?
I think the way you learn anything these days, you Google it. Open science is such a dynamic field right now, and people are coming up with all sorts of solutions for everything. And I think, well, first of all, it's important to find reliable sources of these solutions, because some of these solutions just either don't make sense or don't apply to your methodology. The best thing is to find people who work on open science solutions in your field specifically. So I've been working a lot with education researchers, and I have my absolute favorite data management specialist in education research, and she's posting lots of stuff online. She has an open handbook for data management in education research, and I'm so inspired by sort of her solutions, and I take a lot of those into my work when I teach these solutions. Sometimes you need to develop solutions yourself based on what you find, because you don't find something that fits exactly what you're working with, and then it's sort of trial and error type of thing. But I think there are lots of resources out there online. It does take time to find the resources that are reliable and are good solutions. But this is also why I don't think researchers, like you say, you're trying to find solutions. Why don't you come to me, right? Why are you trying to do it yourself? You should just send a message. You have, people at the library with research background, but also huge open research expertise that can help you find these solutions and implement these solutions exactly in your field of research, because there are also these subject specialists in the library that sort of work directly with specific fields of disciplines.
Speaking of different disciplines, what do you see as sort of some of the major differences between more qualitative and quantitative approaches within psychology, or mixed methods? There isn't, you touched on this before, there isn't sort of this one open science solution for everything. What are some of the major differences here, or some of the misconceptions around how these things are applied between these different subdisciplines?
Well, these differences are just sort of very similar differences to any differences between different methodologies in research. So I'm a little bit on the fence if I like that division, qualitative, quantitative, when we talk about open science and applying open science, because I think you can as well talk about data with personal information versus anonymous data, for example, or there are very different methodologies that we apply in research, and depending on methodology, some open science solutions will be applicable and some will not be applicable, or some will be just more suitable, right? But if we were to make that distinction between quantitative and qualitative, of course, the biggest challenge for qualitative research is the richness of the data material. So those would be, for example, textual data from in-depth interviews that have, if you try to anonymize them, you might completely remove important content from that kind of data. The same with videos, for example, or pictures. How do you remove any sensitive or identifying information from those? And if you do, actually, many emerging technologies make it very easy to re-identify from any anonymization technique. So for qualitative research, this is a huge issue, but also very different analytical approaches in quantitative and qualitative research, where, for example, pre-registration does not always apply to qualitative research, where you have this sort of emerging analytical approach where you make decisions as you go and you cannot really plan much beforehand. In these cases, I still tell researchers that it's better to plan something rather than nothing and put it on paper, but not everybody will find it applicable. So those would be some of the main differences.
We just had an interesting discussion almost half an hour ago about different templates that are out there for pre-registrations. There are different templates depending about your approach. What do you think about this idea of using templates? Do you think one should sort of start from scratch, or how useful have you found templates within your own sort of education?
I think it's incredibly difficult to start from scratch if you've never done something. And I think that applies for anything, literally. Maybe particular for pre-registration, because it's a slightly different genre that we are not being really taught as students. I mean, I know that some of you here teach already at master's studies level, that particular sort of genre, that particular way of planning research. But I think for many researchers for whom this is a new thing, seeing a template is understanding what is actually required from you to put in that kind of document. That said, for example, when I was working with Moira Dillon at NYU lab, we had our own template because
a lab template.
We had our own pre-registration template that we would use for most of the studies at the lab, just because, of course, those were specific studies with infants, with specific setup, and of course we would adjust this template depending on what we were doing. But we just found that easier than following OSF template. But some people might choose also the existing templates online, and that's sort of easier. I think many templates that are out there also allow for quite a lot of freedom with like open fields and uploading different files, and you can just upload your whole pre-registration PDF and just fill out basic information in the template. I think there's a lot of flexibility of how this can be done, but at least templates give some guidance.
Okay. I want to talk about some of the challenges within open science. I think it is not worth pretending that it actually doesn't takes a lot of time to learn these skills.
Of course. And
also to apply a lot of these practices as well. Is it worth it? Is the extra time worth the benefits that we get? What do you think about this idea that it's just not worth all the extra time that it takes?
I think there are a lot of people out there who would say it's not worth it. I would say it's worth it also in a way that, we have all these tools and ways of enabling more transparency. So I think we will be going in this direction of trying to push for more transparency in research. So there is no way out of it in a way, right? I think when you're early career researcher these days, you almost have to get familiar with all these solutions and all these practices. I might be wrong, but I do think that one day all these practices for open science, for reproducibility, will be just default practices of how we do research. And we are recording it, so maybe you can play it for me in 20 years.
10 years time, we'll go back. We'll pre-register this.
Exactly. So this is a pre-registered statement now. I do think so. So I think we are just entering a sort of a new way of doing research, and I do. And if I was to respond to this question, regardless of, okay, that's just the way we'll be doing research, so we have to learn it anyway. If I was just to respond to the question, is it worth it? I think it is, because I heard so many success stories from researchers who used data that were shared with them, or many researchers, even just here at the University of Oslo, who, I don't know, produced so many master's theses and PhD theses from large data corpora. And I think, given how expensive it is to collect new data, even if we talk just about data sharing, that's really a huge benefit. And then lots of success stories from students or researchers who came to me and said that, Agata, after you show me how to pre-register this study, like now I can totally see how it works. It made me think so much more, like my research design is so much better. Thank you for that. And so I maybe I'm biased, right, to how I work and with what I work with, but I do think it's worth it.
That's a really interesting consequence that you just mentioned about how it helps with the planning. Often we think that, it's about making more credible science, but doing a pre-registration forces you to think carefully about how specific can I make these hypotheses if you're hypothesis testing, for instance.
And I always say that, and there are some people that say, like, well, many other things can force you to think carefully about planning. And then I say, yes, so pre-registration is not the sort of ultimate, exclusive, the only tool for that, but it is a tool that we have very easily available. And if it does that, then why not try it? Why not try it out? So I do think, and also from what I hear also from skeptics who became enthusiasts after they tried it, I do think it really does that.
I think an interesting consequence as well is that sometimes in the act of trying to pre-register something, you realize this shouldn't actually be pre-registered. I don't know what my hypotheses are, which is totally fine. And it makes you think this is going to be an hypothesis generating study, which is totally okay as well. But only in the act of trying to do it do you realize I don't actually know specifically what I'm looking for here.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that's as important realization as the other way around, right? And the other way around, I also experienced where I would talk to researchers and they were like, no, like actually, because it will be like, I think mostly exploratory study, so I cannot really pre-register it. And then I'm like, okay, so what are the things you can plan ahead? And then after 15 minutes, they're like, oh my God, like I could actually pre-register all that. Like there are a lot of things we can plan ahead of time. So I think just giving it a little bit of thought and the fact that the Pre-Registration Act is forcing us to make these decisions can help these kinds of realizations in the process.
What do you think open science is going to look like within psychology, or open research within psychology, over the next 10 years? There's been a lot of changes that have been happening over the past 10 years where open science was sort of something on the outside, and now it's very much used within a lot of practices. How are things going to look over the next 10 years? What shifts do you see happening there?
I think one big shift will be sort of following that kind of realization that one size does not fit all, and that you say psychology, but psychology has so many different subfields and so many methodologies. I mean, it's incredibly diverse field, going from clinical, very applied research all the way to super abstract basic research with lots of also qualitative mixed methods approaches on the way. So I think that the way open science will be developing will be towards sort of understanding and recognizing that, and that is both for psychology and any other field. I think big challenge for psychology is that sort of clinical part and sensitive data part, of course, and working with patients and trying to practice responsible open science, where you also consider all the risks, all the potential risks and responsibilities towards participants in your research. Because as much as it's our responsibility to practice research transparently and in a credible and trustworthy way, it's also our responsibility to not expose participants to any risks. And a very interesting particularity about psychology, I think, is that usually in many disciplines, sharing methods is relatively straightforward. But in psychology, we have a lot of instruments that need to be protected from being seen by general population. And I think that's also challenging, that we cannot just put all the, survey tests, stimuli that we use in the lab, in the field, we cannot just share it completely openly so that regular people or non-researchers see it, because we do need to protect these instruments. So I think that's also like one particularity here that that we'll need to think about more, and how can we make things more reusable, but in a smart way, so that they don't just sort of leak out towards those that maybe shouldn't be seeing this material.
Have there been any proposed solutions to that? Because that is quite an issue that I haven't thought about before, because a lot of these instruments we do need to protect, but at the same time it kind of goes against the face of open science. What do we do here?
Dan, are you not practicing open science responsibly? Are you trying to say
It's tricky.
It's really difficult. It's really difficult, and because of that, we have, for example, these repositories for data or methods that have restricted access. So those are curated repositories where there are like actual data or these material curators that sit there, and people need to apply for access for these things. And for example, you as a researcher, so you're a PI of a project, you have, for example, developed an instrument or reused an instrument, and you want to make it available for other researchers. But there are certain conditions. So for example, you can specify that this instrument can only be made available for researchers from higher education institutions. So for example, you can also limit it for non-commercial use. And only if they want to use this instrument for doing research on, let's say, a particular topic or a general broad topic, so that it's not used for other things. And you can write these instructions, and these instructions can sit there with that material in that sort of curated repository with restricted access. Now, there are not a ton of these kinds of repositories. So for example, a data repository we have at the University of Oslo, Dataverse, it's only for fully open material. But we're working towards having also option of restricted access, so that it could be monitored, sort of who is applying for the material.
That's really interesting, because a lot of the problems within open science and having these open materials is how long is a researcher going to be around for? A common problem is you email someone going, hey, I want to better understand your methods. Oh, the PhD student, I've lost contact with them. She left for industry. I have no idea how to get in touch. But this idea of the university is going to be around for a long time. And the idea of having somebody who has this sort of data within access to have someone at the university doing that, I think that's an excellent idea.
I think that's one of the most important solutions we are going towards in the whole open science field, where we outsource the sort of rights to make this material accessible to data managers or to administration at the university. The problem is that even administrators, like sometimes, they also change roles, right? Or so there need to be sustainable solutions where the curation is done by a professional group of curators, but also it's being passed on to next ones within that organization. And lots of these trusted repositories, there is this Trust Seal certificate for these kinds of repositories, have that kind of sustainability plan for example, plus 50 years, let's say, that they have a plan for how this will be managed, how access will be managed.
That's really exciting. That's great to hear the university's working on that.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear. You've been around the game for quite a while. What have you changed your mind about when it comes to open science? What things have you changed your mind about?
I think when I started working with open science, coming sort of directly from my postdoc and as a researcher being sort of excited that now we'll just make everything open and everything transparent, the biggest realization in the last 4 years I've been working on this has been that it's not that simple. And I think that's probably everybody's realization the deeper they go. And actually getting to the point of realizing how really difficult it is. It's both a little scary and exciting because I think there is still lots of work to do for finding solutions that would be appropriate and applicable. And that sort of realization of the diversity of methodologies and how we just have to have good solutions for different methodologies, recognizing exactly what they work with, what they struggle with, what are the limits and boundaries of transparency within these methodologies. And that's exactly the same as when I'm a researcher, if I choose a methodology, that methodology has always certain limitations, right? I choose a methodology for answering my research question, and it will always have certain limitations, right? And I sort of think of it exactly the same as if I apply open science practices to any methodology, there will always be certain limitations to what we can do to make research more transparent and more sort of ultimately credible and trustworthy or reproducible. I try to use that word because reproducibility doesn't fit for every discipline, but it's I'm shooting myself in the foot here. I was trying to pronounce it. Yeah, I think that was probably the biggest realization.
Okay, no, it's even just talking to other researchers as well and hearing the different challenges they have can be really eye-opening to the sorts of unique things that people face in their different disciplines. Absolutely,
and both unique and similar. So I think for me, the fact that I got to work across university and suddenly going from psychology and language research, I went to talk to researchers in geology and astronomy and computational chemistry and social anthropology and education on a daily basis. I think seeing both how similar sort of their challenges are in terms of improving research and all of these unique challenges that I think that really makes you see a full spectrum.
It's really eye-opening. I spoke to a geologist a couple of years ago and we're talking about open science in geology and I'm like, it's just rocks.
Exactly.
Like there aren't
there
aren't people. Can't you make data open? He's like, no, it's so much more complicated than that. There are private and company interests and it was just, you can't make these assumptions between fields. So it's, and you only get that from talking to other people. So that's really cool to see.
Absolutely. Talk to other people.
Yes.
That's one big takeaway maybe.
Before we finish up and open up to the rest of the crowd, I want to ask about the sorts of advice and services the university can offer when it comes to doing open research. What are some of the things the university library can help with and do?
Lots of things. I think any question that you have around how can I make my research more open in terms of any aspect of research, how can I make my research more reproducible, how can I share data, how can I pre-register, How could I make my materials or methods available? All of that, you can come to us, to the section for open research at the University of Oslo Library. But also other things related to sort of digital research in general. We have a digital scholarship center where we sort of help with all sorts of things related to, having your data in the cloud or in the secure cloud, right? And then we collaborate with IT department on these things around the visualization, which also connects to transparency, because good visualization of research is also sort of important to go hand in hand with showing transparently what really is in the data. So we have some great people working at our center around that. And we have people working on that trusted data repository, Dataverse. So all sorts of questions around that. You can come to the library, and Dan, you should come too with your data dictionary.
Yes,
I'll
come
issues.
help with my data dictionary.
Yes.
And there are various events that are also held as part of the Digital Scholarship Center and other events too?
Yes. So I would mostly recommend to sign up for Digital Scholarship Center newsletter, because then you will get sort of regular messages about these events. There are lots of courses. We also teach sort of basic programming skills as related to increasing reproducibility of research. So we collaborate with the carpentries. So there's lots of stuff happening, and I think you should definitely follow the newsletter or the webpage. All the events are listed there. So I would encourage everybody to do that.
As part of the Open Science Initiative here at the Department of Psychology, we have a website. So we're going to, we're even talking today, we're going to add some of the resources, or a lot of the resources you have at the library as well.
That would be great.
That the students and staff within psychology can access those. So yeah, it's great to see all the resources that you have.